Side 2. Today's horoscope. New friends bring excitement into your life. Beware of yellow. How I managed to get any sleep, I don't know. But when I got up the next day, I began to realise that this was a problem I couldn't tackle on my own. I needed help. And the only place I could get help from was school. So before school started, I went round the playground talking to everyone from my class. "Listen," I said, "we've got new neighbours and they're creatures from the furthest reaches of space and they're going to invade Earth. We've got to stop them. Will you help me?" "Not again," said most of them. "Rob, you thought aliens were coming 6 months ago. Let's face it, Rob, the only strange creature living in your street is you." Others just said, "Hey, great game. Can my friend play as well?" I told them it wasn't a game, and they looked at me sadly. "You mean, you really think there are aliens living next to you?" And then they'd sigh and walk off with their hands in their pockets. Some people just laughed straight off. Kevin Durbell threw his arms into the air and screamed, "Ah, chicken lickings being attacked by aliens, run for your lives." And he ran round the playground yelling and pulling stupid faces. I reckon Kevin Durbell is about as funny as poo on your shoe. As for everyone else, they seemed more interested in the fact that the school had been broken into overnight and all the computers and TVs had been nicked. "No TV to watch," they moaned as if it was the end of the world. And all the time I knew how the world really would end if they didn't help me. How many helpers do you think I got? How many brave warriors signed up to fight the aliens and save the world? None. I was going to have to fight them alone. That is how things stood until lunchtime. Then Bogbrush turned up. Bogbrush isn't her real name, of course. Bogbrush's real name is Marcia, and that's partly how she got her name. You know, marsh, bog. They mean the same thing, don't they? So when the other kids, Kevin Durbell mostly, heard that her name was Marcia, they used every bit of imagination in their tiny brains and came up with Bogbrush. I mean, kids can be so inventive sometimes. You can probably tell that I get a bit fed up with nicknames. Chicken licking doesn't exactly send me into ecstasies of delight. Anyhow, at lunchtime I was standing in the playground by myself as usual. If I go and stand next to anybody, they usually move away pretty quickly, and I knew that today they all thought I'd gone off my trolley completely, when Bogbrush came wandering over and stood silently next to me. She's bigger than me, a whole head taller, and she's gangly and awkward and has long thin arms and legs like sticks that she keeps tripping over. I don't suppose I'm giving you a very good impression of her, am I? I'm making her sound weird. But she is a bit like that, tall and thin, with vague eyes, and she's got this big mop of unruly hair, all curls. That's the brush bit, of course. Bogbrush. And there she was, offering her help. It was going to be me and Bogbrush against the mighty force of the aliens. My heart sank into my boots. My right-hand man was a woman. Well, a girl at any rate. "What are they like?" she asked. And my spirits gave a small leap. I have to say a small leap, because after all she was a girl, and a rather weird one at that. Like me, Bogbrush is a bit of a loner. I remembered my horoscope. A new friend. Beware of yellow. The new friend had to be Marcia, and as for the warning, that was so obvious. I think they've got yellow skin, but I haven't seen them properly yet. How do you know they're extraterrestrials? Come back to my house this afternoon, and you'll see why. Anyhow, she continued, they won't be aliens. Those things always turn out to be hoaxes. People said they'd found an alien on a beach a few years ago. You know what it was? The dead, decaying body of a giant squid washed up from the bottom of the ocean. My new neighbours are not giant squid, I muttered angrily. And besides, they'd got stellar markings on their throats. Really? Marcia seemed a fraction more interested. The man and the woman have the same sign. It's a group of stars. Marcia sat down next to me and studied my face carefully. Which group? How am I supposed to know that? She paused, deep in thought. It could be Upsilon Andromedae. That's got a solar system. You mean other planets? Yes, 3 planets have been discovered already, maybe more. Trouble is, Upsilon is 44 light years away from Earth. This was astonishing. I mean, Bogbrush was weird, but I'd no idea she was into astronomy. They'd have to have overcome light speed to get here, and that's supposed to be impossible. Supposed to be, she repeated, although I have my own pet theory on that one. She frowned at her feet. Why do you think there are only 4 of them? I don't know. I suppose there could be more spread across other cities right across the world. A network of aliens preparing... The skin on the back of my neck prickled. I was beginning to scare myself. Bogbrush glanced down at me and gave a little sigh. You worry too much, she said. Suppose they've come in peace. I shuffled my feet. Bogbrush had a point. It just didn't feel right, though. I was certain those aliens were a threat, perhaps the most evil threat the Earth had ever faced. So why have you decided to help? I asked. I'm bored. Oh, great, that was so encouraging. My only ally had joined up through boredom. I took Bogbrush back to my house after school. Mum raised her eyebrows. It was lucky Dad wasn't there. He'd certainly have said something really witty like, "Got a girlfriend?" We went up to my bedroom, pulled a couple of chairs over to the window, and stared at the house over the road. Nothing happened for a while. Mum brought us up some drinks and biscuits. Bogbrush began to wander round my room, poking her nose into everything. "You've got a computer," she said. 10 out of 10. She picked up my medical encyclopedia and began leafing through the section on first aid. Incidentally, have you ever wondered what happens if first aid doesn't work? Is there any such thing as second aid? Or third aid? Or do the doctors and nurses just give up? I mean, it's a bit worrying, isn't it? After a few pages, she turned to me and said it was little wonder I spent most of my time worrying. If you stopped reading stuff like this, you wouldn't fret so much. I like reading that stuff. Listen, do you know what to do if a poisonous snake bites you? No? There you are, then. Rob, when did you last see any kind of snake round here? I couldn't answer that one. I was about to ask her if she thought there was such a thing as second aid, when Norman suddenly appeared outside his house. Quick, look! Bogbrush gazed out of the window. Her lips twisted into a curl. He is weird, she said, and I could have hugged her. I said I could have. I didn't say I did. At last, someone seemed to be thinking what I was thinking. And there's his mum, I pointed out. Look, you can see part of the mark. Spooky. Bogbrush stared hard. I'd like to get a closer look at that. I should be able to recognise it. Anyhow, I thought you said their skin was yellow. That's when they're in their alien state. At the moment, they're pretending to be humans. When do you think they'll be ETs, then? Tonight. I'm sure they'll slip into their alien condition at night. What do you think we should do? Bogbrush turned away from the window. I was hoping you'd have a plan. Not really. I suppose the first thing to do is prove that they are aliens. And there's only one way to do that. She sat down and fiddled with a pencil. We shall have to get into their house at night and take photos of them in their alien state. That will prove it to everyone. My heart had come to a complete stop. Into their house? Are you mad? We may as well ask them to kill us now. Don't be so wet. It's not like we're going to knock on the door. We sneak in when they're asleep. This idea was pretty mind-blowing. I mean, normally, when you make a new friend and ask them round to your house, you listen to music together or maybe play a game on the computer. Bogbrush was suggesting we sneaked into someone else's house in the middle of the night and took snapshots of them. It was fantastically exciting and horrifyingly scary, and it could just work. I nodded slowly. All right, we'll do it, as long as I have time to make my will before we go. Have you got a camera? No. Bogbrush, why suggest it if you haven't got one? Bogbrush lifted her chin, and those vague eyes of hers suddenly went into sharp focus. You call me Bogbrush, and I'll call you Chicken Lickin', okay? How do you want to play this, Rob? Talk about turning red. I felt like a nude beetroot. Sorry, I muttered. I think my dad's got a camera downstairs. I'll see if I can find it. How do we get into the house? I smiled. This was the easy bit. I've got a key. The last people who lived there gave my parents a spare key so that Mum could feed their cat when they went away. We've still got it. I don't think the locks have been changed. Marcia and I looked at each other. This plan was suddenly becoming a very real thing. We were going to do it. We were going to enter the alien stronghold, and I hadn't even decided what I wanted written on my gravestone. My heart started fluttering again, like a little bird between a cat's jaws. "Okay," I said. "Meet up by the bushes in our front garden at midnight, yeah?" Marcia nodded. The colour had drained from her face. I asked her if she was scared, and she shook her head, her tight curls bouncing about her face. "No way," she said quickly. At the door, she turned back to me. "I'm petrified," she said, and vanished quickly down the stairs. I was astonished. I'd never realised that Marcia, had words like petrified in her vocabulary. I had to go and look it up in the dictionary. She was turning out to be a dark horse. Or a stone. I was left in my bedroom thinking. Suddenly this whole business was turning into something real. I wasn't on my own anymore, worrying about alien invaders. Marcia was with me, and we were really doing something. Scary stuff, eh? We never made it that night. We managed to meet up all right. Marcia was already waiting when I finally got outside. It had taken me longer than I thought to get ready. I kept forgetting things like my Swiss Army penknife, torch, compass, chocolate rations, signalling mirror, Dad's camera, and so on. Then I had to go back for bandages and plasters just in case, and finally I went back for the emergency foil blanket. I'd read somewhere that shiny foil can protect you from some alien weapons. I stuffed everything into a rucksack. "Where are you going?" hissed Marcia, staring at the rucksack. "On safari?" "You never know what you might need," I explained. I felt a bit embarrassed, but I had to ask her. Are you wearing clean underwear?" "None of your business." We stood there shivering in the shadows, and we were just plucking up enough courage to cross the road when this UFO turned up. Well, I say turned up. I suppose that sounds as if it came wandering over like some kid at a party with nobody to talk to. I know how that feels. It sounds silly, but that's how it was. This UFO arrived from nowhere, silently, up in the sky, high above the Vaux's house. It was the faintly shimmering lights that first got our attention. They rippled round its edges. In the darkness of the night sky, it was difficult to make out its shape properly, but it appeared to be flat and circular, and there seemed to be a hole in the centre of the base. It stayed in the same place, hovering at high altitude. And it was all so strange. The sky was clear and full of stars like any other night on Earth, and here, bang in the middle of it, was a craft from another world. And then the colours came. They came in transparent waves like drifts of coloured gauze, yellow, green and blue, radiating out from beneath the craft, spreading and sinking towards the ground, right behind the Vaux's house. There was no noise, just the lights. And then they stopped, and the UFO drifted away into the night. I was rooted to the spot. Did you see that? Fabulous. Marcia had a rapturous smile. How can you say that? I can hardly believe it. I've seen a real UFO. We have to tell someone. This is getting far too dangerous. We can't handle this by ourselves. We must go to the police. Marcia swung her torch onto my face, almost blinding me. What do you think they'll do? Chase it with a squad car? Arrest it for parking in mid-air? She began to laugh. This road hasn't even got double yellow lines. Anyhow, it's gone. We have to do something, I insisted. Tell your parents, then. Oh, come on. If they know I've been out here at this time of night. Marcia nodded. I know what you mean. It's funny, isn't it? We could be out here saving the world, and all my mum would say would be, never mind the alien invasion, you get back to your bed at once. Crazy! Snap. We gazed at each other for several seconds and decided. "Police," we chorused, and set off for the police station, running like the wind. Well, I ran like the wind. Marcia ran more like a drunken giraffe. She tripped over her legs at least once on the way. I guessed we realised it was a mistake the moment we opened our mouths and said aliens to the desk sergeant. He began asking why we were out at that time of night, did our parents know, etc., etc. I mean, police are just like parents in uniform, really, aren't they? "And what did this UFO look like?" asked the desk sergeant, grinning at all his mates who'd turned up to have a laugh at our expense. I struggled for words. "It was dark," I began. "Yes, a common phenomenon at night time," said the sergeant. "He meant the UFO was dark," scowled Marcia. "It was a hazy shape, shadowy." I nodded. I could almost hear my English teacher hammering on about using similes to explain things more clearly. "It was like a giant circular cheese box," I said. "You know, the ones with little foil triangles inside." The sergeant clicked his tongue several times and tapped his pencil on the desk. "So, let's see if I've got this down correctly. There was this giant round camembert floating through the sky." "I didn't say it was a cheese," I pointed out acidly. "Like a cheese box," Marcia reminded them, "and it was too." A stout policeman in his shirt sleeves came and stood by the sergeant. He fixed us with a serious frown. "Are you sure it was a camembert? It could have been gorgonzola." "Or cheddar," suggested a young constable, but the sergeant shook his head. No, it wouldn't have been cheddar. That's more sort of wedge-shaped." Honestly, this attempt at humour was at my dad's level. "You don't believe us, do you?" I asked. "No, we don't." "And you're not even going to ask around to see if anyone else saw what we saw?" "No, but I'll tell you what I am going to do." "Telephone our parents," sighed Marcia. The young constable grinned. "She can read your thoughts, sir. Spooky doos." 10 minutes later, our parents turned up, all three of them. I hadn't realised that Marcia lived with her mum. Her dad was somewhere else. I'll tell you later, don't rush me. So, imagine the little scene that now followed. Imagine your parents turning up at a police station in the middle of the night to collect you. All this time they thought you were safe and sound in bed, fast asleep, and now they discover that you've been roaming the streets after midnight with a girl. You know those English exercises you do at school sometimes where you have to choose the right word to complete the sentence? Well, try this one. Your parents discover that you've been roaming the streets after midnight in the company of a girl. Are they angry, furious, ballistic, raging, explosive, going nuclear, volcanic, delighted, happy, cheerful, laughing? I guess you'd probably choose the same as me, every one of those words except the last four. However, that only describes my very predictable parents. What I found odd, as I was being dragged away to do my 100-year jail sentence at home, was Marcia's mum. She didn't seem surprised at all. She sort of sighed and apologised to the police for wasting their time. She gave me a strange look and asked Marcia if she'd been out stargazing again. Marcia nodded and winked across at me. That was the last I saw of her that night. In the car going home, I was subjected to the kind of questioning that spies are put through in order to extract top-secret information from them. And finally, Mum and Dad got on to the big stuff. "This has to stop, Robert." "There was a UFO," I insisted. "The Vauks are aliens. Stop it at once. You're living in a fantasy world. You spend far too much time worrying about things that can never happen. Not another word. That's enough. We're fed up to the back teeth with all this. Go to bed and stay there." I went up to my room and stood at the window gazing across the street. "OK, Vauks," I thought. "You win for the time being, but I'm coming back. And I won't be alone. I shall have Marcia with me." Somehow, I didn't think the aliens would be terribly scared. But I went to bed feeling a bit better. Today's horoscope. You make a discovery that could change everything. Romance is in the air. Watch out for that new person in your life. You probably want to know what happened to Marcia's father. At lunchtime the next day at school, Marcia told me that he'd fallen in love with another woman. Now they're living with each other. He left 2 years ago. I was a bit shocked. To tell you the truth, I didn't really know what to say next, and when I did, I wish I'd kept my mouth shut. That is gross. Marcia snorted back at me. Grow up, Rob. This remark made me feel small and pathetic, and I don't mean in the cuddly hamster kind of way. I mean that snapped rubber band feeling, and a manky wet rubber band at that. I couldn't understand how Marcia could be so cool about such a thing. I'm sorry, I offered. That's exactly what Dad said when he left, Marcia answered in a tight voice. Do you miss him? She nodded, and I said brightly that she could have my dad if she wanted. Don't joke about it, Rob. You'd miss him if he wasn't there, I'm telling you. Marcia gave me a twisted kind of smile. You don't want to, but you do. This was getting embarrassingly heavy for me, and I desperately tried to change the subject. Why did your mum ask you if you'd been stargazing again? It's my hobby, astronomy. Everything began to click into place, how Marcia had known about distant galaxies and all that stuff. I go out sometimes with the telescope Dad gave me last year. I have to go out at night. You can't see stars by day. I do know that. Of course you do, only my mum doesn't. She doesn't like me going out when it's dark. I was struck by a thought. Maybe she doesn't like it because you're using the telescope your dad gave you. Marcia gave me a sharp look. Never thought of that. Quite a little psychologist, aren't you? Suppose you read about it in your medical encyclopedia. She saw the look on my face, apologised, and began to laugh. What? It's just that in the last 5 minutes we've both had to say sorry to each other. We were silent for a while, until I eventually plucked up enough courage to ask Marcia why she let people at school call her Bogbrush. You don't like me doing it. You should know better. Anyhow, I don't care about them. I don't need them as friends. They don't bother me. When I want a friend, I'll find someone I actually like, and it'll probably be someone who doesn't care what small-minded people think about them. Somebody who's just his own self. Everybody's his own self. Marcia shook her head. No way. Most people go around trying to be the person they think others want them to be. Wow. I mean, what do you say when someone comes up with something like that? It took me almost 5 minutes just to work out what she meant. It was no wonder everyone kept clear of Marcia. Just listening to her talking made me want to go, stop it! My brain's hurting, it's turning to jelly. So I did. You're making my brain turn to jelly. It's called thinking, Rob, Marcia declared. It's just that your brain's not used to it. Thanks a lot. Sorry. You're better than the others at school, but you could try using your brain a bit more, you know. It's okay for you, I whined. Doesn't hurt your brain. You don't know that. I thought, here we go again. She's got an answer for everything. Quick, time to change the subject. This is basically my trick for getting out of anything that seems to be going the wrong way. Change the subject. What are we going to do about the Vauxhall? I asked in desperation. Marcia folded her arms and smiled at me. That's typical, she murmured, trying to change the subject. So now Marcia was reading my thoughts too. She gave a long sigh. All right. I guess we'll have to try and get in there again. Without proof, nobody will listen to us. Tonight? I suggested, and she nodded. We'd better make it later than last night then. My parents will be on double alert. I doubt that. They'll never think you'll be stupid enough to try it 2 nights in succession. Tonight will be ideal. I hope you're right. What about 2 o'clock? OK, I'd better go. If people see us talking like this, they'll start thinking stupid things. I thought that sort of thing didn't bother you, I said. I was thinking of you, Marcia snapped back, and she strode off, this time without tripping over herself. That evening, I sat upstairs and reread my horoscope. You make a discovery that could change everything. That could only mean what was going to happen tonight. Tonight was the night. We were really going to see the aliens. Romance is in the air. Watch out for that new person in your life. I didn't want to know about this. I'm too young for romance, I said, and was startled to hear Mum the other side of my bedroom door. You talking to yourself in there, Robert? It was the aliens, I grunted. Mum opened the door and put her head round the corner. Don't be cheeky. I told you not another word about aliens. Poor Marcia's mother. Heaven alone knows what she thought about last night. Who is that girl, anyway? She seemed ever so strange. Mum thinks most people are strange for one reason or another. She'll say things like, "Look at that man, isn't he strange?" Or, "What a strange woman." Then you look at the people she's looking at, and there's nothing strange about them at all. What is strange is that you can put a couple of aliens right in front of Mum and she doesn't even notice. Her name's Marcia. She's in my class. She's clever. She didn't look clever, and it certainly wasn't at all clever to go gallivanting round the streets after midnight. She paused and then asked, oh, so casually, "Is she your girlfriend?" Mum, that is so predictable. Oh, that's a big word, Robert. It was in our spelling test last week, I muttered. Can I get on with what I was doing now? What was that? Thinking. Mum widened her eyes and tiptoed theatrically from the room so as not to disturb the great thinker. She didn't know that I was actually thinking about Marcia, or to be more precise, about Marcia and her parents. I tried to imagine what it would be like not having a dad, and I just couldn't. It was too difficult. Then I began worrying. Suppose my dad went off, or Mum. I would probably be the last to know. I remembered the times they'd quarrelled, the times they hardly spoke to each other. Maybe this was what my horoscope meant. This was the discovery that could change my life. Maybe the romance wasn't about me at all, but about one of my parents. Maybe the new person in my life was going to be a stepfather or stepmother. No! This was all going horribly wrong. I jumped to my feet and pounded downstairs. Mum was just sitting down in front of the television. I swallowed hard. Can I ask you something? Of course. You won't be cross or laugh at me or anything? Mum shook her head. Any other mum would probably have said, I can see there's something worrying you, son, but Mum knew that I was always worried anyway. She kept quiet and waited for me to speak. You know what I wanted to ask? I wanted to say, do you still like Dad? Are you thinking of leaving? But I knew it was stupid. I couldn't ask her questions like that. I tried to think of some other way of putting it, but nothing seemed right. Doesn't matter, I said. Was it about Marcia? Mum prompted with a tiny, knowing smile she thought I wouldn't notice. Parents, eh? What do you do with them? You can read them like a book. End of side 2.